Tay stood in the corner of the briefing room, trying to make himself invisible. It wasn't working. Every pair of eyes in the room kept glancing his way, and none of them looked friendly. Some looked curious. Most looked annoyed. He was the only human on the warship Eternal Vigil. The only human in a crew of 200 alien soldiers. The only human in the entire Third Strike Squadron. Commander Rin stood at the front of the room, her biometallic armor gleaming under the harsh lights. She was Critharian, a species known across the galaxy for two things: their unbreakable armor and their unbreakable will. Her armor covered her like a second skin, silver and blue, moving with her body as if it were alive. In a way, it was. Critharian armor bonded with them at birth, growing stronger as they did. "We have new orders," Rin said, her voice cold and clear. "The Void Swarm has taken the mining colony on Epsilon 7. We deploy in 6 hours. This will be a ground assault. Close combat. No room for mistakes." Her eyes swept across the room and stopped on Tay. "And no room for dead weight." The other soldiers shifted. A few made sounds that might have been laughter in their languages. Tay kept his face neutral. He'd heard worse in the 3 weeks since his assignment began. Humans were new to the Galactic Coalition. Very new. First contact had happened only 5 years ago, and most species still didn't trust them. Humans were small, weak, and died too easily. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom. They were emotional and unpredictable. Most aliens thought humans had no business in a war zone. Tay was a combat medic and xenobiologist. He'd studied 17 different alien species, could treat wounds in biology types that shouldn't even exist, and had saved more lives than he could count. But none of that mattered here. Here, he was just the fragile human who might get someone killed. After the briefing, Rin called him to her office. He went, knowing this conversation wouldn't be pleasant. "I didn't ask for you," she said the moment the door closed. "I don't want you. But Command thinks humans need to prove themselves. So here you are." "Yes, Commander," Tay said. "When we deploy, you stay with the support ships. You don't land. You don't engage. You wait for casualties and treat them on board. Understood?" "With respect, Commander, I'm trained for field medicine. I should be on the ground with the team." Rin's armor rippled, the plates shifting in a way that meant anger in Critharian body language. "You're a liability. Your people break easily. I won't risk my soldiers trying to protect you. I don't need protection. Everyone needs protection. That's why we have armor. That's why we train for decades before we see combat. You humans think 3 years of training makes you soldiers. It doesn't. It makes you targets." Tay wanted to argue, but he knew it was pointless. "Understood, Commander." "Good. Dismissed." 6 hours later, the dropships launched. Tay watched from the medical bay as Rin's squadron descended toward Epsilon 7. His hands moved automatically, preparing equipment, organizing supplies, doing anything to stay busy. The medical staff around him were Veltorian, tall and thin with 4 arms each. They worked efficiently, ignoring him. The battle started badly. The Void Swarm was a species no one understood. They weren't intelligent in any normal sense. They were more like a virus with ships, consuming everything they touched. They didn't negotiate. They didn't retreat. They just swarmed. Tay listened to the combat chatter, his stomach tight. Voices shouted in half a dozen languages. The translation software struggled to keep up. He heard explosions, screams, the horrible sounds of soldiers dying. Then he heard Rin's voice, strained and urgent. "Squadron leader to Eternal Vigil. I'm hit. Engines failing. I'm going down in Sector 4. Copy that, Commander. Rescue team deploying in 15 minutes. Negative. Sector 4 is overrun. Too dangerous for rescue. Understood. Hold position. We'll extract after we secure the area." Tay didn't think. He just moved. He ran to the hangar, grabbed a rescue shuttle, and started the launch sequence. A Veltorian medical officer tried to stop him. "You can't fly that. You're not authorized." I'm a certified pilot, Tay said, which was technically true. He'd logged the minimum hours required. And I'm going. The shuttle dropped from the eternal vigil like a stone. Tayday's hands shook on the controls as he dove toward Epsilon 7. The planet's surface was a nightmare of fire and smoke. Void swarm ships darted through the air like angry insects. He found Hayrin's fighter crashed in a canyon. Void swarm ground units were already closing in. Tayday brought the shuttle down hard, the landing gear screaming against rock. He grabbed a medical kit and a weapon and ran. Hayrin was climbing out of her wrecked fighter, armor scorched and dented. She saw him and her face twisted in anger. "What are you doing here?" "Saving your life, Commander." He fired at the approaching swarm units, his shots precise despite his racing heart. "Can you walk?" "I don't need saving from a human." But she was limping, one leg dragging. Tayday got under her arm, taking her weight. She was heavy, the armor adding mass, but he managed. They moved toward the shuttle, Tayday firing, one-handed at anything that got close. A swarm unit lunged from behind a rock. Hayrin twisted, bringing up her arm cannon, but it sputtered, damaged. Tayday pushed her aside and shot the creature point blank. It collapsed, twitching. They made it to the shuttle. Tayday practically threw Hayrin into the cabin and jumped into the pilot's seat. The engines roared. Swarm units crashed against the hull. Then, they were airborne, climbing fast, leaving the nightmare behind. The flight back was silent except for Hayrin's labored breathing. Tayday's hands finally stopped shaking. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. When they docked with the Eternal Vigil, Hayrin stood slowly. She looked at Tayday for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You disobeyed orders," she said. "Yes, Commander. You risked your life for mine." "Yes, Commander." "Why?" Tayday met her eyes. "Because that's what we do. We don't leave people behind. Ever." Hayrin stared at him. In her culture, pragmatism ruled. A commander who couldn't fight was a commander who should die. Resources weren't wasted on the fallen, but this human had risked everything for her. And she didn't know what to make of it. "You're either very brave or very stupid," she said finally. "Probably both," Tayday admitted. For the first time since they'd met, something that might have been respect flickered in Hayrin's eyes. "I still think you're a liability," she said. "But perhaps less of one than I thought." It wasn't much, but it was a start. The retreat to Talvos 7 was a disaster wrapped in shame. The Coalition fleet had lost 3 major battles in 2 weeks. Ships limped through space, trailing debris and bodies. Morale was lower than the fuel reserves. Talvos 7 was a moon nobody wanted. It had thin air, sharp rocks, and nothing worth fighting for. That made it perfect for a temporary base. The Void Swarm wouldn't waste resources attacking a worthless rock. Probably. Tayday worked 20-hour shifts setting up the field hospital. Hospital was a generous word. It was really just a cluster of inflatable tents, surrounded by portable generators and whatever medical equipment they'd managed to salvage. The largest tent became his main surgery. The others were for recovery, supplies, and the morgue. He'd requested help, but personnel were stretched thin. He got 2 Veltorian nurses and a Critharian supply officer, who clearly resented being assigned to medical instead of combat. They worked in cold silence, barely acknowledging Tayday's existence. The wounded started arriving before the tents were fully set up. Burns, broken bones, radiation sickness, injuries from weapons that shouldn't exist. Tayday moved between beds, his hands steady even when his mind screamed at the horror of it all. On the 3rd day, they brought in Void Swarm wounded. The Veltorian nurses refused to treat them. "They're the enemy," one said. Her 4 arms crossed in disgust. "Let them die. They're patients," Tayday said. He was already examining one of the creatures, careful of its toxic blood. "We treat everyone. That's insane. They'll kill us the moment they wake up. Then we'll sedate them properly. But we treat them." Word spread fast. By evening, half the camp knew the human medic was wasting supplies on swarm casualties. Hei Rin came to the medical tent just after dark, her armor gleaming in the harsh work lights. "Is it true?" she demanded. "You're treating the enemy?" Tayday was elbow-deep in the chest cavity of a Veltorian soldier. "Can this wait, Commander?" "No. Answer me." He didn't look up from his work. "Yes. I'm treating enemy wounded. They're suffering. I'm a doctor." "That's what doctors do. You're wasting resources that could save our soldiers." "I'm not wasting anything. We have enough supplies for both." He finished suturing and stepped back, letting his nurses take over. Only then did he face Hei Rin. "On Earth, we have something called the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. It doesn't say do no harm unless they're the enemy. It just says, do no harm. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Maybe, but it's what makes us human." Hei Rin's armor plates shifted, the telltale sign of frustration. "Your species is too soft for war." "This proves it. We've been at war with each other for thousands of years, Commander. We know exactly what we're doing." She left without another word, but Tayday knew the argument wasn't over. The attack came 3 nights later. Alarms screamed across the base. Tayday was sleeping on a cot in the corner of the main tent when the first explosions hit. He was on his feet in seconds, his mind racing. The Void Swarm had found them. Of course they had. Soldiers ran in all directions, grabbing weapons, forming defensive lines. Tayday stayed in the medical tent. His job wasn't to fight. His job was to be ready for the wounded who would come. They came fast. A transport flipped by an explosion, throwing soldiers like broken toys. A direct hit on a munitions depot, causing burns that made Tayday's stomach turn. And then Hei Rin, half carried by 2 of her squadron members, her armor cracked and leaking the hydraulic fluid that powered its systems. "Put her on that table," Tayday ordered. "Everyone else, triage stations." Now, the tent became controlled chaos. Tayday worked on Hei Rin while shouting orders to his staff. Her armor was the problem. It was designed to never come off, to protect its wearer until death, but part of it was damaged and pressing into her side, and if he didn't remove it, she'd bleed internally. "I need to cut away part of your armor," he told her. Through gritted teeth, she said, "You can't. It's bonded. You'll kill me. If I don't, the armor will kill you. Trust me." Her eyes met his. Trust. That word again. The thing humans did so easily, and Critharians did almost never. "Do it," she whispered. Tayday's hands didn't shake. He'd studied Critharian physiology for weeks after being assigned to the Eternal Vigil. He knew where the armor connected to nerve clusters, where it could be safely cut. The laser scalpel hummed. Silver blue pieces fell away. Hei Rin screamed once, then went silent. He worked fast. Repaired the internal bleeding. Sealed the wound. By the time he was done, Hei Rin was unconscious, but stable. He moved to the next patient. Then the next. Then the next. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it finally ended, 30 coalition soldiers were dead. Twice that many were wounded, and Tayday had been awake for 36 hours straight. He found himself in the corner of the tent, surrounded by bodies he couldn't save. 3 Veltorians. 5 Critharians. 2 members of species he'd only just learned the names of. All dead because he wasn't good enough. Wasn't fast enough. Didn't have the right equipment, or the right knowledge, or the right magic words to keep them breathing. He didn't cry. Not then. He just sat there. Empty. That's when he heard movement. Hei Rin was awake, sitting up on her cot. She saw him in the corner, saw the bodies, understood. She stood slowly, wobbling slightly, and made her way across the tent. She sat down beside him, saying nothing. They sat in silence for a long time. Outside, other soldiers were cleaning up, counting casualties, preparing for the next attack. Inside the tent, 2 warriors from different worlds shared the weight of loss. "You saved 40 lives tonight," Hei Rin said finally. "I counted. I lost 13. You can't save everyone. I know. Doesn't make it easier. Rin looked at the bodies, then at Tay. My people don't cry, she said. We're taught from childhood that emotion is weakness. But sitting here, seeing what you see every day, I think maybe we're wrong. Maybe crying isn't weakness. Maybe it's just honest. Tay looked at her. Really looked at her. She was still wearing most of her armor. But where he'd cut it away, he could see her actual skin. Gray-blue. Covered in scars. She looked tired. Mortal. You stayed in the tent during the attack, she said. You didn't run. You didn't hide. You just worked. That's my job. No. Your job is to be a medic. Staying calm under fire. That's courage. The kind my people respect. She paused. The kind I respect. It wasn't an apology. Critharians didn't apologize. But it was acknowledgement. Recognition. Maybe the beginning of something that looked like friendship. Get some rest, Commander, Tay said softly. So do you. I will. Soon. Rin stood, slower than usual, and made her way back to her cot. But before she lay down, she turned back. Thank you, she said. For cutting my armor. For trusting yourself when I couldn't. Tay nodded. Words felt too heavy right then. As Rin slept, Tay finally allowed himself to close his eyes. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more wounded, more impossible choices. But tonight, for just a moment, he'd made a connection. He'd shown an alien warrior that humanity's softness could also be its strength. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The siege began on a Tuesday. Not that Tuesdays meant anything on Talvos 7, but Tay still kept track of Earth days. It helped him remember that somewhere, far away, life was still normal. People were going to work, having coffee, complaining about traffic, normal things. Here, normal meant counting bullets and rationing water. The void swarm surrounded the base camp on all sides. They didn't attack in waves. They just pressed in, constant and patient, like a tide that never retreated. Every few hours, they'd test the defenses. Every few hours, more wounded would arrive at Tayday's tent. He worked without stopping, 48 hours straight, then 60. His assistants begged him to rest, but he couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the ones he'd lost. Sleep felt like giving up. Rin was back on active duty. Her armor repaired, but still marked where Tay had cut it. She led defense teams, organized supply runs, did everything a commander should do, but every few hours, she'd appear at the medical tent, checking on her soldiers, checking on him. You need to sleep, she said on the second day. I'm fine. You're not. You're shaking. Tay looked at his hands. She was right. They trembled slightly, fatigue making his muscles unreliable. I'll rest when things calm down. Tay, things won't calm down. This is war. It's never calm. Then I guess I'm not resting. Rin's armor rippled with frustration, but she didn't argue. She understood. In her own way, she was doing the same thing, pushing past limits, refusing to stop until the job was done. On the third day, a supply run went wrong. Badly wrong. A team of 15 soldiers tried to reach an equipment cache 3 kilometers from base. The void swarm ambushed them. Only 4 made it back. The casualties flooded the medical tent. Tay moved like a machine, his mind sharp even as his body screamed for rest. Triage, surgery, stabilization, over and over. He saved 6 of them. 5 died on his tables. By the time the last body was carried to the morgue tent, it was night. Or what passed for night on Talvos 7. The moon had no real day-night cycle, but they dimmed the base lights every 12 hours to maintain some sense of normalcy. Tay had sent his assistants away hours ago. They needed rest, and someone had to be functional tomorrow. He stayed, cleaning equipment, restocking supplies, doing all the small tasks that kept a field hospital running. But eventually, the tasks ran out. The tent was clean. The supplies were organized. There was nothing left to do except face the silence. That's when it hit him. 13 people dead in 3 days. 13 soldiers who'd trusted him to save them. 13 families who'd never know exactly how their loved ones died, only that it happened in a tent on a worthless moon in a war that seemed endless. Tay sat down on the floor, his back against a supply crate. The tears came before he could stop them. Not loud sobs, just quiet crying. The kind that emptied you out from the inside. He didn't hear Rin enter the tent. Didn't know she was there until she spoke. Tay. He looked up, quickly wiping his face. Commander, I'm sorry. I was just... Don't apologize. She stood in the entrance, her armor catching the dim light. Then, slowly, something impossible happened. Her armor began to retract. Tay had studied Cretharian culture. He knew what this meant. The armor was part of them. Their pride and protection. They never removed it around outsiders. Never. To do so was to show complete vulnerability, absolute trust. The silver-blue plates folded back, revealing Rin's true form underneath. She was smaller without the armor, thinner. Her gray-blue skin was covered in scars, some old and faded, others fresh. She looked tired. She looked mortal. She walked across the tent and sat down beside him on the floor, saying nothing. They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, the camp was quiet. The void swarm was gathering for another assault. Tomorrow would bring fresh horrors. But right now, in this tent, there was just 2 people trying to carry impossible weights. Your people cry, Rin said finally. Her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Mine cannot. Our biology doesn't allow it. But we feel it all the same. Tay nodded, not trusting his voice. I lost my first command to the void swarm, Rin continued. 20 soldiers. I was young, inexperienced. I made mistakes. They paid for it. She looked at her hands, scarred and rough. I told myself I'd never feel that pain again. I'd be harder, stronger. I'd follow the rules perfectly, never let emotion guide me. And for years, it worked. What changed? Tay asked quietly. You. She turned to look at him. You saved me when it made no tactical sense. You treat enemies because your ethics demand it. You work yourself to death because you can't bear to lose anyone. Everything my training says is wrong. But it's not. Is it? It's just different. It's human. Tay managed a weak smile. We're stubborn like that. Stubborn, emotional, soft. Rin paused. Brave. The word hung in the air between them. I don't feel brave, Tay admitted. I feel like I'm failing. Every person I lose. It's like I didn't try hard enough. Didn't know enough. Wasn't good enough. That's because you care. My people are taught not to care about individual losses. The mission matters. The collective matters. The individual is expendable. She touched one of her scars. A long line across her ribs. But when I look at you, I see someone who fights for every single life like it's the only one that matters. That's not weakness. I don't have a word for it in my language. Hope, Tay said. That's what we call it. The stupid, stubborn belief that we can save everyone, even when we know we can't. Hope, Rin repeated, testing the word. We don't have much of that in Cretharian culture. Maybe you should. She almost smiled. Almost. Maybe we should. They sat together for a while longer, neither speaking. Tay felt lighter somehow, as if sharing the burden had made it easier to carry. Rin seemed more at peace too. Her shoulders relaxed in a way they never were when she wore her armor. Thank you, Tay said eventually, for this. He gestured at her. At the retracted armor. At the trust she'd shown. In my culture, showing yourself without armor is reserved for family, Rin said. For those you trust with your life. She met his eyes. I trust you with my life, Tay. You've earned that. I won't let you down. I know. That's why I'm here. Eventually, Rin stood and her armor began to reform, the plates sliding back into place. In moments, She was Commander Hayrin again, warrior and leader. But something had changed. Some connection had been made that wouldn't break. "Rest now," she ordered gently. "That's a command from your superior officer." "Yes, Commander." As she turned to leave, she paused at the tent entrance. "Tomorrow will be hard. The swarm is massing for a major assault. But we'll face it together. All of us. Including you." "Including me," Tayday agreed. After she left, he lay down on his cot. For the first time in 3 days, sleep came easily. And for the first time since the siege began, he didn't dream of the dead. He dreamed of tomorrow, and the people he'd save, and the impossible hope that somehow they'd all make it through. It was enough. For tonight, it was enough. The morning of the 4th day, the Void Swarm stopped testing the defenses. They just stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the attacks. Everyone knew what it meant. They were gathering for one final push. Commander Hayrin called an emergency meeting. All senior personnel crowded into the command tent, a generous name for a reinforced shelter with a few computers. Tayday was there too. Somewhere along the way, he'd become important enough to include in strategy sessions. "Status report," Hayrin said, her voice clipped and professional. The news was bad. Ammunition was down to 30%. Food and water could last another week, maybe. Medical supplies were critically low. And reinforcements were still 4 days away. "We won't last 4 days," said Jae-woon, the Veltorian tactical officer. His forearms gestured at the tactical display. "The swarm has at least 3,000 units surrounding us. We have 200 soldiers, half of them wounded." "Then we evacuate the non-combat personnel," suggested another officer. "Get them to orbit. The fighters can hold while—" "No evacuation," Hayrin interrupted. "The swarm controls the airspace. Any ship we launch will be destroyed." "Then what do we do?" Silence filled the tent. Everyone knew the answer, even if no one wanted to say it. "We make our stand," Hayrin said finally. "We hold as long as we can. When reinforcements arrive, they'll find we fought to the last." "It was a death sentence," said calmly. "The Critharian way." "Non-combat personnel will be evacuated to the inner bunker," Hayrin continued. "That includes medical staff. When the perimeter falls—" "No," Tayday said. Everyone turned to look at him. "Excuse me?" Hayrin's voice was dangerous. "With respect, Commander, I'm staying. People will get hurt. They'll need immediate medical attention. I can't help them from a bunker. You'll die. Maybe. But so will everyone else if they bleed out waiting for help." He met her eyes steadily. "I'm staying." Hayrin's armor rippled with frustration. "You're not a soldier." "No, I'm a medic. And medics don't hide when people need them." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then, Hayrin gave a sharp nod. "Fine. But you stay behind the defensive line. The moment fighting starts, you pull back." "Understood." The meeting ended. As everyone filed out, Hayrin caught Tayday's arm. "Why?" she asked quietly. "You could survive this. Why throw your life away?" "Because you're staying," Tayday said simply. "Because Jae-woon is staying. Because everyone in this camp is staying. How can I ask them to risk everything if I'm not willing to do the same? That's not logical." "No. But it's human." He smiled slightly. "And you said yourself, maybe that's not a bad thing." Hayrin didn't smile back, but something in her expression softened. "You're going to get yourself killed one day. Probably. But not today." "No," she agreed. "Not today." The Void Swarm attacked at sunset. They came in a wave, thousands of them, screeching and clawing. The defensive line lit up with weapons fire. Energy bolts. Projectiles. Explosives. Everything the coalition soldiers had left. Tayday stayed behind the line as ordered, his medical kit ready. Wounded soldiers were dragged back to him. He worked fast, stabilizing injuries, sending the worst cases to the medical tent, getting the others back into the fight. But they were losing. The swarm just kept coming. For every 10 they killed, 20 more appeared. "We need to fall back," someone shouted. "Hold the line." Hayrin's voice cut through the chaos. Just a little longer. But there was no little longer. There was just endless enemies and dwindling ammunition. Tayday's mind raced. There had to be something. Some weakness. Some way to wait. He'd been studying captured void swarm specimens for weeks. Their biology was strange. Based on chemical signals that coordinated their movements. They were individuals, but they acted like a hive mind because of pheromone communication. Chemical signals. Pheromones. "Commander!" Tayday shouted over the weapon's fire. "I need 5 minutes." "We don't have 5 minutes." "Then make them." "Trust me." Hayrin looked at him. And in that moment, all their shared experiences flashed between them. The rescue. The siege. The night in the tent. Trust. "Fall back to secondary positions," Hayrin ordered. "Give the human his 5 minutes." Tayday ran to the medical tent, his mind working furiously. Chemical signals. The swarm used chemicals to communicate. What if he could disrupt that? What if he could create a counter-signal? He grabbed every medical chemical he had. Antiseptics, anesthetics, even the hydraulic fluid from damaged Critharian armor. He mixed them together in proportions that made no sense for medicine, but might work for chemical warfare. 3 minutes gone. The mixture was ready, but it needed to be dispersed. An aerosol. He grabbed every spray bottle and canister he could find, filled them with the mixture. 4 minutes. He ran back to the line, carrying an armload of makeshift chemical weapons. "I need these spread along the perimeter. Spray them toward the swarm." "R." Soldiers looked at him like he was crazy, but Hayrin nodded. "You heard him. Do it." They sprayed Tayday's mixture into the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the swarm stopped advancing. They didn't retreat. They just stopped. Confused. Their coordinated movements broke down. Some wandered in circles. Others attacked each other. The hive mind was scrambled. "Now," Hayrin shouted, "while they're disorganized." The coalition forces pushed forward, cutting through the confused swarm units. What had been an unstoppable wave became a scattered mob. Within an hour, the immediate threat was eliminated. In the aftermath, Hayrin found Tayday sitting on a supply crate, exhausted. She sat down next to him. "What did you do?" she asked. "Disrupted their chemical communication. I noticed their attacks were too coordinated to be individual decisions. They were following pheromone signals. I created a counter-signal that overrode their natural ones. You weaponized medical supplies. I improvised. That's what humans do." Hayrin was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I told you once that your species was too soft for war. I was wrong. You're not soft. You're terrifying." "Terrifying?" "You look at a hopeless situation and refuse to accept it. You see a problem no one else sees, and solve it with things that shouldn't work but do. You make impossible things possible through sheer stubborn will." She looked at him with something close to awe. "That's not weakness. That's the most dangerous kind of strength." Tayday didn't know what to say to that. "We'll hold now," Hayrin continued, "until reinforcements arrive. Because of you. Because of all of us," Tayday corrected. "You gave me the time I needed. Your soldiers trusted me enough to try something crazy. This wasn't me. This was a team. A team with a human at its heart," Hayrin said. "I'm starting to think that's exactly what the coalition needs." Around them, soldiers were regrouping, tending wounds, celebrating survival. The siege wasn't over, but they'd made it through the worst. And they'd done it together. Tayday looked at Hayrin. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being worth trusting." As night fell over Talvos 7, Tayday allowed himself to hope. Not just for survival, but for something bigger. A future where different species didn't just fight together, but understood each other. Where strength came in many forms, and all of them mattered. It was a very human hope. And maybe, just maybe, it was spreading. 6 months later, Tayday stood in the Grand Hall of the Coalition High Command, feeling completely out of place. The hall was enormous, built to accommodate hundreds of species, each with different size requirements and environmental needs. Crystal pillars reached toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into artificial clouds. Delegates from across the galaxy filled the space, their voices creating a symphony of alien languages. Tay wore his dress uniform, the formal version of Coalition Medical Corps attire. He'd never felt more uncomfortable. He was a field medic, not a politician. He belonged in a tent with wounded soldiers, not a palace with generals and ambassadors. Beside him, Hayrin stood in full ceremonial armor, polished until it gleamed like a mirror. She looked perfectly at ease, which made sense. She'd spent her whole life preparing for moments like this. "Stop fidgeting," she said quietly, though her voice held a hint of amusement. "I'm not fidgeting. You're absolutely fidgeting. You've checked your uniform 3 times in the last minute. I just want to look professional. You saved an entire base camp with medical supplies and creative thinking. I think they'll forgive a wrinkled collar." Before Tay could respond, the hall fell silent. The Supreme Commander of Coalition Forces, a massive Veltorian named Bo-Ra, stepped onto the central platform. "We are here," Bo-Ra announced, her voice echoing through the hall, "to honor those who turned defeat into victory at Talvos 7. The defense of that position has become legendary. Against overwhelming odds, 200 soldiers held for 4 days until reinforcements arrived. Their courage saved countless lives." The crowd applauded, a sound that varied wildly across species. Some clapped. Others clicked mandibles. A few released bioluminescent flashes. "But today," Bo-Ra continued, "we recognize that victory came not from traditional tactics, but from something new. Something the Coalition has never fully embraced." She gestured toward Tay. "Lieutenant Tay, please step forward." Tayday's heart hammered as he walked to the platform. Thousands of eyes watched him. He felt very small and very human. "Lieutenant Tay," Bo-Ra said, "your actions at Talvos 7 demonstrated the unique value of human thinking. You saw solutions where others saw only problems. You refused to accept defeat when defeat seemed certain. And most importantly, you showed us that different approaches to warfare can be just as valid as traditional ones." She pinned a medal to his chest, a Coalition Star of Valor. Only 30 had ever been awarded. Tay was the first human to receive one. "But beyond personal recognition," Bo-Ra continued, "your service has sparked a larger conversation. Commander Hayrin, please join us." Hayrin walked to the platform with military precision. She and Tay stood side by side, an odd pair, the small human and the armored Critharian. "Commander Hayrin has submitted a proposal," Bo-Ra said. "A proposal that challenges centuries of Coalition military doctrine." "Commander, please explain." Hayrin's voice carried across the hall with absolute confidence. "For too long, we've organized our forces by species. Humans with humans, Critharians with Critharians. We assign roles based on biological strengths, warriors, engineers, medics, and we expect everyone to fit into predetermined categories." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But Talvos 7 proved this approach is flawed. Lieutenant Tay didn't save us by being a good medic. He saved us by being human. By bringing a perspective we didn't have. By refusing to think like we think." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some approving, some skeptical. "I propose," Hayrin continued, "that we create integrated units, mixed species teams where humans aren't just medics, but full participants, where their creativity, adaptability, and yes, their emotional thinking are valued as tactical assets, not liabilities." The murmurs grew louder. A Critharian general stood. "This is unprecedented. Our species have different capabilities. Mixed units would be inefficient." "Inefficient?" Hayrin's armor rippled, a sign of controlled passion. 200 soldiers held against 3,000 enemies. That's efficient. And it happened because we stopped treating our differences as weaknesses and started treating them as tools. Another voice, this time from a Veltorian admiral. "Humans are fragile. Mixing them with combat species puts everyone at risk. Tay surprised himself by speaking. With respect, Admiral, humans have been fighting wars on Earth for thousands of years. We're good at surviving. What we lack in armor, we make up for in adaptability. Give us a problem, and we'll find a solution you never considered. That's exactly my point, Hayrin said. At Talvos 7, traditional tactics failed. Human thinking succeeded. Imagine what we could achieve if we deliberately combine different ways of thinking, instead of keeping them separate. Bo-Ra raised a hand, silencing the crowd. The proposal is noted. But before we vote, I want everyone to see something. A holographic display activated, showing footage from Talvos 7. The desperate fighting, the overwhelming odds. Then Taiday's improvised chemical weapon, scattering the swarm. The footage showed soldiers from 4 different species working together in the aftermath, treating each other's wounds, sharing supplies, functioning as one unit. This, Bo-Ra said, is what integration looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but effective. She looked at Hayrin. There's one more thing you wanted to address, Commander. Hayrin nodded. She turned to face the entire assembly. And then, slowly and deliberately, her armor began to retract. Gasps echoed through the hall. Critharians in the audience shifted uncomfortably. What Hayrin was doing, showing herself without armor to hundreds of strangers, was almost unthinkable in her culture. But she did it anyway. This is vulnerability, she said, standing before them in her true form, smaller and scarred. My people are taught to hide it, to armor ourselves, literally and figuratively. But I've learned from humans that vulnerability can be strength, that admitting you don't have all the answers, that you need help, that you trust others. That's not weakness. That's wisdom, she gestured to Tay. This human taught me that. In a tent on a worthless moon, he showed me his pain, his fear, his honest emotion, and I realized that I'd been measuring strength all wrong. Armor protects you from harm, but it also isolates you from connection, from growth, from the very things that make us better than we were. Her armor began to reform, the plates sliding back into place. I'm not suggesting we all give up our armor, she said with a slight smile. But maybe, just maybe, we should be willing to take it off sometimes. To trust each other. To learn from each other. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, delegates began to stand. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. It wasn't unanimous agreement, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that something had changed. Bo-Ra called for a vote. The proposal passed. Narrowly, but it passed. Integrated units would begin as a trial program. Humans would serve alongside other species, not as support staff, but as full partners. After the ceremony, Tay and Hayrin stood on a balcony overlooking the coalition capital city. Spires of crystal and metal reached toward the stars. Ships moved through the sky like schools of fish. You changed everything today, Tay said. We changed everything, Hayrin corrected. You showed me a different way to think. I just shared it with others. Still, taking off your armor in front of the entire High Command? That took courage. Hayrin smiled a real smile. Not the tight diplomatic expression she usually wore. I learned from the best, a small, fragile human who refused to let armor, literal or metaphorical, stop him from doing what was right. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city. Somewhere down there, the first integrated units were being formed, humans and aliens learning to work together, not despite their differences, but because of them. Do you think it'll work? Tay asked. This new approach? I think it has to. The Void Swarm is still out there. We need every advantage we can get. Hayrin looked at him. And humans are an advantage. Your stubbornness, your creativity, your refusal to give up, those aren't weaknesses. They're exactly what the coalition needs. You know what humans would say to that? What? About damn time someone noticed. Hayrin laughed, a sound Tay had never heard from her before. It was good to hear. As the sun set over the capital, Tay-Day allowed himself to feel proud. Not for the medal or the recognition, but for what they'd started. A future where different species didn't just coexist, but thrived together. Where every perspective had value. Where armor could come off, and trust could grow. It was a very human dream. But now, it was becoming a galactic one, and that made all the pain, all the fear, all the impossible choices worth it.